One healer left. Welcome back to the Mentor Roulette grind. This time, we once again have a livestream highlights edition of the series, and once again we're going with randomly picking jobs for every duty. All things considered, we got quite an interesting mix of duties, with both some easier ones and some harder ones. Now, that said, for duty 1, we are Warrior and Qitana Ravel. In the Giga pull after the first pull, we have a moment where the Astrologian has a lag spike, which causes them to teleport. How strange. I wasn't too worried, as I'm reasonably certain I've managed to solo this pull synced in the past. On the first boss, our Astrologian gets suddenly killed by the overlapping AoEs. A tip for this is, once both half-room cleaves are in effect, pay attention to the statues first, and move based on them. You can actually already start moving when you can see which arm is glowing on the boss after that, as he always strikes with his arm hitting a part of the arena the statue is not hitting, as far as I remember. Meaning, if the right arm glows, stepping clockwise out of the statue AoE should be safe. If the left arm, counterclockwise. On the second boss, our Astrologian also got hit by overlapping pillars. This one is not always easy to gauge, but the shadows on the pillars sort of kind of indicate which direction they will fall. But if all else fails, aim to be far enough away that at most one pillar can hit you, as that should be survivable. Near the end of the dungeon, there is this wacky pull you can perform by pulling the pack away from the gorillas out on the vine. However, in this specific group, I did the pull so perfectly that no one got close enough to the gorillas, so they didn't come down at all until I came closer. A small general tip about Warrior in the level range of 72 to 79, where you have Chaotic Cyclone but not in a Chaos, is that inherently guaranteed crits, like Chaotic Cyclone, but not in a release boosted Fell Cleave, also causes Raw Intuition's healing to auto-crit. So, if you need more healing, this can be handy. However, the somewhat recent nerf of Chaotic Cyclone makes this a much bigger damage loss than it was in the past. For duty 2, we went to Worqor Zormor as Sage. At a few points throughout the duty, our tank seemed dead set on pulling all the way to the wall. Not a big deal, especially since, in this dungeon, the last pack in each pull is usually reasonably close to the wall anyway. However, had this not been the case, it would be worth mentioning that in this party composition specifically, it could be somewhat problematic for some black mages to keep up full attack capacity for an extended jog. On the final boss, our Dragoon dies to getting knocked into a tornado and out into the wall. My advice for this mechanic is that the first knockback is easily manageable. Use your knockback immunity for the second knockback so you don't have to worry about aiming around the tornadoes. For duty 3, we went to Shisui of the Violet Tides as Paladin. Our healer in this group seemed to like Cure 1 quite a bit, but they were also attacking somewhat frequently, so I decided to not worry too much about it. In this level range, Paladin and White Mage combined also have an incredibly low amount of non-GZD healing available to them, so while I don't quite agree with Cure 1, I can see that they might end up using Cure 2 a bit here and there. A tip about this pack just before the first boss is that the Mutsus spawn precisely when the big serpent dies, so focusing it can sometimes be a bit faster overall. I also want to mention that even with the mild concerns about our healer, we still went ahead unflinchingly at the Giga pull before the second boss. As I've talked about before, as this pull is surrounded by bosses, both the tank and healer likely have most of their cooldowns, making it surprisingly safe. And indeed, we cleared with no major issues. For duty 4, we went to Bismarck Extreme as a 12-minute replacement Dragoon. We even had 5% echo, so they had tried. The main thing that can sneak up on groups on this one is that standing on Bismarck's back applies a stacking debuff that makes you take more damage while on Bismarck. This can easily be missed as the first jump on Bismarck's back is far enough apart from the second time that it will run out. This is, however, not the case for the third jump though, which can lead parties to suddenly die at that point. The alternative is spending over half of your uptime just waiting for the debuff to end. However, our team cleared Bismarck on the second jump, removing this concern entirely. For duty 5, we went to A2N, the Mob Rush of Alexander, as Ninja. One tip here at least is to remember that Hide refreshes your ninjutsu, so while clearing the mobs before the boss, make sure you spend all your jutsu charges and hide quickly to get Hide's cooldown going too. In the boss fight itself, if you can call it that, it was quite chaotic too. A sustained AoE fight like this is basically my worst nightmare when playing Ninja. Most enemies either don't stay in one place or last long enough for Doton to be worthwhile consistently. While Trick Attack can be handy for certain targets, you hover a lot around the target count where Katon is just that much better than Huton that it doesn't matter anyway. Sometimes you may feel compelled to even single target some enemies just because it seems easier, and also because some other jobs might just cleave the other mobs better than Ninja at this point. For duty 6, that's right, he's back at it again everybody! It's Ramuh Extreme! As Gunbreaker. Before we can even start, one of our healers leave. However, the other healer we have is a champion and tries their absolute hardest anyway. Note that we don't realize that the group isn't looking for replacements until a bit ways into the duty. The reason is that it turns out that healer is the leader, so they had to press the button, and they did not know this. This was eventually resolved. On the first pull, we gradually fight our way through and almost make it, but due to all the various damage taken, our healer runs out of juice and we wipe, just moments before Ramuh goes down too. On the second pull, the majority of the party suddenly dies to overlapping circles. Either our summoner didn't know they could or should raise players, or they had already decided we should probably wipe it, which, fair enough. On the third pull, we once again gradually die out, but this is also when we realized the problem with finding replacements. Multiple players in the live chat mentioned trying to join to help, but either missed or realized we were not looking for anyone. And as soon as the settings are set right, Thor from the chat joins as our Sprout Sage hero. And on the fourth pull, we gradually work our way through with equal amounts of chaos, but with 2 solid healers to keep us alive, we managed to make it through. Something a bit funny I noticed about our black mages is that one of them at times would just repeatedly cast Blizzard 3, like a stock record. But aside from that, from what I could see, played alright. The other black mage instead played full-on balance mage, F3 B3 repeat. That said, overall, well done to the team. For duty 7, we went to Titan Extreme as a bard, and Lichaw is our warrior tank here. On the first pull, we have deaths from various mechanics, which lead us to gradually wipe up, failing just shy of beating Titan first. A notable mistake was jails being too close together. Twice. Remember, you need to get away until the tether disappears. Parties can fight through it, but it takes a lot to do so. On the run back of the second pull, we get most of the mechanics just right, except then 3 DPS all die at once to a knockback. But as our tanks and healers are all solid players, we managed to push through. The tanks even made sure to tank switch reliably enough to make sure the debuffs didn't stack too high, leading to, all things considered, a reasonably smooth Titan clear. For duty 8, we went to Porta Decumana as a Scholar. Strange how frequently I get Porta Decumana specifically as Scholar or Sage. Remember, at level 50, Art of War is a gain on 1, as it does just as much damage as Rune 1 and has no cast time, so make sure to get those auto attacks in. Another classic tip here is to remember that if everyone is at full HP, then your pet is doing nothing, so don't bother healing too much unless it is needed. Relying on Whispering Dawn, your pet's embraces, and lustrates should serve you well as long as people don't take too much avoidable damage. Probably unsurprisingly, we had no issues here. Meanwhile, the team at my house trying to snipe me found themselves trying to beat Sephiroth Extreme for the full lockout without success. It sometimes just is like that. For duty 9, we went to M4N, Wicked Thunder, as Black Mage. The team here had pretty solid damage as we managed to skip the second wing phase. Remember, once she reaches past a certain HP threshold, she will move on to the Desperation phase after finishing the current phase she's in. For some general Black Mage tips, you may have looked at Swiftcast and Triplecast and thought, with all of my spells having shorter cast times than the GCD, these are not DPS tools anymore. However, the amount of regular movement in the Black Mage rotation often means you don't need to sit on these cooldowns for a rainy day. You probably won't need 2 triple casts and swift cast for a movement mechanic unless you planned extraordinarily poorly. As such, there is, especially at level 100, some optimizations you can do. You may notice in the footage that I use transpose every time I'm switching state. This is because casting Blizzard 3 in Umbral Ice means it avoids the damage lost by using it in fire. By swift casting it, the fact it has a very long cast time is also avoided. It is only 87 potency gained, but over the course of a fight, this adds up. When using a triple cast for this can also frequently result in sequences of upwards of 7 or 8 instant cast spells in sequence. Similarly, when entering Astral Fire, you may know of AF1F3P, which is to use a fire starter from a previous Astral Fire state, to similarly transpose and instant cast Fire 3 to save time. However, with the changes to Black Mage, you can now do this without a prior fire starter by simply using Paradox first. This means you can, essentially, avoid ever having to cast a Cold Fire 3 or a Hot Blizzard 3. The gains are somewhat small, but they add up. I actually go over both of these tricks in more detail in this other video on the topic of non-standard Black Mage stuff. For duty 10, we went to Mhigo as White Mage, and this run took quite a while, as our Dark Knight tank decided to single pull pretty much the whole dungeon. Not only that, while they may have used MP on attacks a couple times throughout the duty, for the most part, they didn't. There were times where they used Delirium while at full MP and didn't even use Quietus or Bloodspiller, so it just went completely to waste. On top of that, I did not see many, if any, defensive cooldowns. For all these reasons, while yes, I could just have asked them to pull more, or alternatively just pulled more for them, I don't recommend that option, I would rather not have to spam heal a tank that is hardly using their toolkit in the first place. Now, that said, a tip for the final boss, Xenos, is that his tank buster, while 3 separate swings, can be partly dodged. Once you see the first swing, step through him to avoid the 2 follow-up swings. It massively reduces his damage output. For duty 11, we went to A1N, Fist of the Father, as Summoner. I realize, as we start on the actual boss fight, that my Summoner set actually has 0 spell speed on it, aside from Materia, so my GCD of 2.50 means only 5 impulses per Dreadworm trance. The horror! Pro tip, if you frequently play Summoner in synced down content, it may be a good call to have the spell speed you need for your optimal setup on the gear itself, so it still works while synced down. For a tip for this boss, I highly recommend, as the boss draws near 20%, to maybe stockpile some resources if you can, both to stall the damage mildly on it as the second boss becomes targetable, but also to have that stockpile to catch up on the second boss. After they're both on the field, try to keep them somewhat even in HP, as while you can just kill off one then the other, some parties have trouble doing this in time. Especially if 2 of your DPS die off during the final DPS rush at the end. Yes, I have indeed wiped to the explosion from this once or twice in my day. And finally for duty 12, we went to P10N, Pandæmonium. Literally. As Reaper. And Aradel was here with me, alongside us being 3 Reapers in total here. Crazy! Throughout the fight, my main focus was to get the double enshrouds as cleanly as possible. I think I may have started the enshrouds too soon, however, they panned out mostly alright despite that. Over the course of the fight, I dropped combo at least once, which, while not that bad, can add up since Reaper's step 3 does a surprising amount of damage. Now, 2 tips for Pandæmonium here specifically. First, when you need to run off to the side platforms, take note that the boss will do a half-room cleave first, basically every single time, so don't run off too soon. Certain other mechanics can be easier to handle by making use of the extra space of the platforms when the web is up. Also, keep in mind that the green goop puts a very heavy dot on you, even for normal, so make sure you walk carefully over the web bridges. The second tip, which mainly goes out to first-timers and savage raiders, is that when the boss uses Harrowing Hell, you need to be all the way up to the edge near the boss, as the knockback is extremely strong. And unlike Savage, there is no web wall to catch you. I've been told this often catches specifically Savage Raiders off guard. Quite an interesting set of duties, and once again, I escaped being caught up by the squad trying to snipe at my house. Also, 3 extremes with a grand total of 4 wipes between them is pretty solid, I would say. Now, that is all for this video. Thank you so much for watching. If you would like to support me and my channel more directly, you can become a member like these wonderful people here. You can also alternatively support me through Ko-Fi, link in the description. You can also support the channel by letting the YouTube algorithm know by liking the video, leaving a comment, subscribing, sharing, and hitting the bell to get notified when next I post a video. Fun fact, Art of War has been a gain on 1 until you get Broil since the start of Endwalker, meaning this trick has been available for this short level range for over 3 years.